Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Aksan and my partner is Iqbar. So, in this meeting, we would like to present about our material, observing the result of the plan and reflecting and planning for further action. So, enjoy our discussion. The first thing should discuss is about observing the result of the plan. Well, action research is a sequence of action and reflection. In other words, the researcher should start by examining and analyzing the data right from the very beginning dynamically. Well, there are four steps of observing the result. The first is preparing for data analysis. The second is analyzing and synthesizing qualitative data. The third is analyzing and synthesizing quantitative data. And the last is making sure that your conclusions are trustworthy. Well, the first thing that the researcher should do to observe the result of the plan is preparing for data analysis. In preparing data analysis, the researcher should be away from the hustle-bustle situation of the classroom in order to find the more objective ideas. Other than that, focused research question is also needed. Well, in analyzing the data, the researcher should do the continuing process because there is no instant way to analyze action research data. Moreover, the researcher should take out the key meanings and messages and filter what the data are actually telling about. The researcher can sketch out other ideas, build up personal theories, and find some new possibilities for classroom practice in further cycle. Burns stated that there are 5 general useful steps to help the researcher to prepare analyzing the data. There are assembling data, coding the data, comparing the data, building meaning and interpretations from the data, and the last is reporting the result. On the other hand, the researcher should understand how to analyze and synthesize qualitative data. As renowned, qualitative data is all about number analyzing. Therefore, the researcher can collect the data through journal or diary entries, interviews, classroom recordings of interactions among the researcher and or students, and observation notes. So, the main tools for analyzing qualitative data are categorizing and analyzing talk. So, categorizing here means sorting the objects and information into logical groupings. Usually, qualitative data is categorizing through inductive coding, or as known as AMIC approach. It means the researcher should scan the data carefully and should be several times to see what categories appear from the data are. In other words, inductive coding creates the categories from the data. In opposite, deductive coding creates the categories first, then the data are added to the categories. Moreover, coding the data means that the researcher finds the bright ways of their confusedness. The first thing the researcher should do is collect all the data, for example from the journal or interview results. Then, the researcher should read the data more than a few times to catch what the data about. Then, the researcher possibly possibly can underline some interesting or unexpected information. Next, the researcher should give a label to the main subject matter that is being expressed. Then, make a list for different initial categories on a sheet of paper or on a computer. The next, researcher should group the initial categories more into subcategories that all relate to the main category label. After all those steps, the researcher can consult the result through their colleagues. Well, besides categorizing, analyzing talk is one of the main tools in analyzing qualitative data. In analyzing talk, the researcher probably deals with recording or transcripts from the recording repeatedly to get deeper the analysis. Furthermore, the original transcriptions probably become stronger to be the interpretation of the data. Besides, the most important aspect of analyzing classroom talk is to listen deeply to what speakers say. Additionally, there are 4 steps to analyze talk. There are providing general characterization, identifying distinguishingly obvious features, focusing in on structural elements, and developing a description. In providing general characterization, the researcher first should listen to what participants said in general, then write in general idea as well. Next, when identifying distinguishingly obvious features, the researcher should look more closely at the obvious features, then note in specific number of speakers and what they are saying, what kind of thing that they talk about, and etc. Then focusing in on structural elements means the researcher should understand the structure of the conversation. In other words, the researcher should write the transcript orderly or analyze the structure of the conversation. And the last is developing a description. In this step, the researcher should describe the description in objective ways. Well, after discussing about qualitative data analysis, now move to the quantitative data. As we know, quantitative data is well known as analyzed in numerical form. So, in analyzing quantitative data, there are 2 ways: numerical scale and descriptive statistics. Well, numerical scales consist of nominal scale, ordinal scale ranks numbers, and interval scale. Nominal scale is all about the real number of the categories of the groups of data, for example, assigning 1 for female and 2 for male. However, the ordinal scale is all about ordering data across a continuum number, for example, ranks. And the interval scale ranks number and describes the interval or distance between them. For example, 1 for very often, 2 for often, 3 for quite often, 4 for rarely, and 5 for never. Well, actually, the difference between interval scale and ordinal scale is that interval scale provides the dynamic distance between one another, while ordinal scale no. Meanwhile, descriptive statistics provides 2 ways to understand There are measure of central tendency and measure of dispersion or variability. Measure of central tendency means a single value is given to the set of quantitative data. The number shows where the set of data collects around a central point. There are three ways to reduce numbers. They are mean, median, and mode. Well, we provide an example of the mean. But before that, I would like to show you that mean means average, and to find a mean, the researcher should look at a set of numbers that had been collected and add them up and then divide by the total of the number of items. Can you see the example? This is a set of test score out of 10 students in a class. There are 20 scores from 8 to 2, and to find the mean, you should add those numbers: 8 plus 4 plus 6 until the end, and we find the result. It's 106. Can you see? After that, divide by the number of items. 106 divided by 20 scores or 20 people. So we find the result. It was 5.3. Can you see? Well, however, calculating the mean still has limitation. For example, getting decimal points can be a problem if numbers don't reflect your real life. For instance, if you wanted to calculate the average number of books students need, if the result is showing a decimal like 1.67, it's impossible if each student gets 1.67 books, isn't that? And the other example, if it will be unreal when not all students want to have, for example, the result of the mean is 3 books. Then if not all students want to have 3 books for study, it can be some students need less than 3 or more than 3 books. Therefore, median here comes as the alternative way to cover these problems. Well, take a look at a median. So at this slide, you can see the example of medians. Actually, the median is what we call comes as the middle point of a set of numbers arranged from the smallest to the largest. Median is better used if the researcher wants to show the central points of a range of scores. Then look at the example. The first example shows 15 numbers, and you can find the median from the middle of those numbers. But remember, you should order the number from the smallest to the highest number and find the middle number of those numbers. And the second example is 16. We saw 16 numbers. Can you see? From 45 to 93, there are 16 numbers. It looks It's looked easy if the number of items is odd. The median can be seen from the middle of the number. But if the number of items is even, the researcher will find two numbers in the middle. Don't you see? And to reach the median from that number, you should find the middle of those two numbers by adding those two numbers and divide it by 2. Well, the advantage of the median is it gives you a typical value for the sets of numbers of scores. But it can't be said to select a representative participants for the group as it doesn't show the range of actual score. Well, now move to the mode. The mode is the number that most frequently or popular score which appears in the set of scores. The most useful thing about mode is that it can tell us what is typical, usual, or normal. Then from this example, there are 20 scores you can see at your screen. Well, to find mode, we just have to find what number frequently appear at the sets of number. Here we can see 6 for 3 times. Is that? I hope you find them. So, in conclusion, all these measures can give us a quick and neat picture about what the center or the middle from sets of number. So when deciding which of these 3 measures, mean, median, and mode, the researcher should consider that the measure can inform something. On the other hand, measures of dispersion or validity means how numbers are spread across the data set. There are 2 ways. If you remember on the previous slide 14, there are 2 ways of measure of dispersion. There are range and standard deviation. Well, range informs the researcher by how many points individuals are spread from the center. The range gives the clearest picture when all the scores are relatively closely grouped together. To find the range, you should identify the largest and smallest numbers, then subtract to find the range of the score. Well, move to the standard deviation. Standard deviation informs the average of the distance of each score from the mean. For example, here we provide example. There are 5 numbers, a set of numbers, and 5. It consists of 5 numbers, 18, 20, 22, 24, and 26. So the first thing you should do is find the mean for the total score by dividing the total by the number of items. Do you still remember how to find the mean? Well, good. Add those numbers, 18 plus 20 plus 22 plus 24 and plus 26. And we find the result. It's 110. So the next is you divide by 5. Why should be 5? Because you find 5 scores at that set of number. So 110 divided by 5, we find 22. So the second, you should subtract the mean from each score. 18 minus 22, 20 minus 22, 22 minus 22, 24 minus 22, and 26 minus 22. And the next is square each of the differences. So after you have found the result of the subtract in step 2, now your turn to square each of the differences, and we found the result. The next, add the squared differences. From the result of the third step, we found 16, 4, 0, 4, and 16. And you should add those numbers. And we found 40. And then subtract 1 from the total in the set. So the total of number is 5. Don't you see? 18, 20, 22, 24, and 26. It consists of 5 scores, isn't that? Then you should subtract 1. Why should be 1? Yeah, I don't know. It's the formula. And we find 4. The result is 4. So the next step, divide the total of the squared difference in step 4 by the total from the subtraction in step 5. In step 4, we found 40, and in step 5, we find 4. Then 40 is divided by 4, and the result is 10. Then the last step is find the square root of the total in step 6. The 10 must be square root, and you find the standard deviation. It's 3.16. It's a quite long step, isn't that? Hope you are ready and understand about what I have told. So here we go to the last step of observing the result of the plan is by checking validity in action research, or making sure that your conclusions are trustworthy. So to help the researcher present realistic and credible findings, here are some ways. Keep the pedagogical focus of the research in mind. It means the researcher should make sure that the focus of the research, the questions that ask, the methods that used to collect the data, and the way to analyze the data should be focused to improve the education which have the same problem as what the researcher study about. Therefore, the researcher can also improve the reliability through giving attention to the ethical principles, such as make sure that students understand what the research about, asking permission, and manage the participant to cooperate with the researcher. And the second is use more than one source of information. Here, using more than one source of information to give different points of view and allows for more objectivity is called as triangulation. And commonly, the researcher uses this way, triangulation, to strengthen their research. It means the researcher involves participants' opinion in order to minimize the biases of researchers' own assumption. Then the third is immerse yourself in the data. Some researchers probably can't get the data what they are expected. Therefore, to filter the analysis and make sure they are reliable, the researcher should discuss findings with colleagues, talks to the participants, rereads the data several times, goes back to the literature on related topics, reads other teachers' action research, goes back to the major issues in the research focus, and reviews the question. And the last is maintaining objectivity and perspective. Sometimes researchers can't find what they are looking for about the data, and it's quite frustrating. So through going back over the data several times and using some of the techniques above, the researcher can progressively decide how to handle these aspects of the research. Besides, the researcher can also provide deep description of the context, examine and reflect the data openly and honestly, and explain the specific details of the research. Well, that's all from me, and our discussion will be continued by Iqbar. Thank you.
Okay, now we talk about reflecting and planning for further action. One of the most basic and essential aspects of our development as a classroom professional is to reflect on our experience. Whether these are experiences of teaching or IR, deep reflection serves to build knowledge about curriculum development. Building knowledge in IR is based on the deeper kind of the reflection that comes from investigating your classroom systematically. So, reflecting in an IR cycle often has a dramatic effect on how teachers build their personal knowledge about aspects of their teaching. There are four kinds of reflection that are important when we want to reach conclusion and develop interpretation in IR. They are reflecting on practice, research process, belief and values, and reflecting on feelings and experience. Now we talk about the first one, reflecting on practice. Teaching involves classroom action on a continuing basis. In AR, ongoing practical action is the engine that drives the research process along. Also, the action or the practice that are part of your research are always subject to reflection. And reflection on action is what gives rise to further ideas for practice. So, practice and reflection practice cannot be separated in the ER process. And you can do and know about this reflection by answering this question, such as, how did I select my practical action to improve my classroom situation? Why did I select this particular action? Or, how did the action I selected work to improve the situation? For me, as the teacher, for my students, or for other people involved. Then the second, reflecting on the research process. A good teacher reflect on their daily teaching practice. In AR, the relationship between the teaching, action, and research are made close, systematic, and ongoing. Your AR process is likely to have been a much more intense experience than regular day-to-day teaching. You will have selected certain issues that were problematic or challenging and given them special attention. You will have collected systematic information about these issues. Essentially, you will have been involved in conducting a kind of practical experiment to test out your ideas or hypotheses about how to improve your classroom situation. Action and reflection are tied together as a central part of the research process if it is to keep going and achieve positive outcomes for you and your students. And we can know about this reflection by answering these questions, such as, how did I go about testing out my practical action? How have I collected data to inform my practical action? Or, how did I use the data to illuminate what was working in my classroom? Next, the third, reflecting on belief and values. Even if we are not consciously aware of them, Our personal belief and value about teaching and learning affect everything we do in the classroom. The way we select particular language items or skills, the activities we use to teach them, and the different roles we take as a teacher are all based on what we believe about our reflect. These are the practical theories that we also bring to our research. Action research aims to improve and change situation, and our personal belief and value are central aspects of the process. Because IR allow for deeper engagements with a practical situation than routine teaching, we are also likely to end up examining, questioning, exploring, and expanding our personal practical knowledge. This kind of knowledge doesn't just contribute to our own development as teacher. When we discuss our reflection with the other and publish our research, it adds to the development of the language teaching profession as a whole. And we can know about can this reflection by answering these questions such as what are two of my strongest personal beliefs about teaching? What are two of my strongest personal beliefs about learning? How did this belief affect the decision I made as I did my research? Or how has my research deepened my understanding of my personal belief and value about language teaching? And the last, a fourth, reflecting on feelings and experiences. Action research doesn't only involve thinking about concrete action and using technique for collecting and analyzing data. It also has an emotional and psychological aspect that brings personal feelings and experiences to the surface. However, AR can also challenge our most thoroughly held teaching approaches or routines when we realize that our practices might need to change. At the same time, what happens in IR should not be treated as a test of our success or failure as a teacher. As Aldrich, Potts, and Samek point out, IR means seeing and experiencing the art of the possible. In other words, it means we should opening ourselves up honestly and courageously to the problems, dilemmas, possibilities, and opportunities in our teaching context. It means we should also trying to find the change that make a difference of our research. And we can about this kind of reflection by answering these questions such as what were your personal reaction to the change that resulted from your practical action? Were they positive or negative? How did you deal with the negative reaction? What impact did the positive reaction have? Or did the negative reaction trigger ideas that you had not talked about before? If so, how and what did you do? After we talk about the reflection, now we talk about the planning the next step. Reflection is dynamic and happens throughout the AR cycle. If you have already done any AR, you have probably experienced this aspect yourself. Nevertheless, at some point, you will want to decide whether to continue or conclude the cycle of research. There are usually various pragmatic or practical reasons for deciding to end the research. For example, like the issue you wanted to explore has been resolved to your certification, you no longer have an external requirement to continue the research, or the teaching situation you are in does not encourage research. AR is never ending, but most teachers don't really want to spend the rest of their life doing research. The number of cycles you complete depends on some of the factors and also from what your research itself suggests about whether you need to keep going. It will depend on whether you feel you have reached a satisfactory level of reflection and you can see a logical stopping point, or whether you want or need to go further. Therefore, you can plan the next action in your research result, and some of those actions are continuing the action, concluding the action, and sharing with others. First, Continuing the action. From your point of view, it might be that the first cycle of research has resulted in a mixture of both successes and failures. Or you have gradually realized that the issues or questions you started off with were not actually the main ones you needed to address. You might still have more questions than answers about the change in your classroom. Classroom. So, depending on where this first cycle has taken you and the time and interest you have available, you might decide to keep going. Sometimes, the second cycle will involve testing out the same issues with a different participant to see whether your new teaching strategies continue to work well. Alternatively, you might go in a completely different direction because you realize you have not yet fully explored the issues you had in mind, or because the first cycle of research did not give you the outcome you were looking for. Second, concluding the action. As you reach the end of your AR cycle, more and more you will find yourself dropping together connection and building meanings about the whole process. This will be a period of reflecting back across the whole journey or story of the research in order to bring out your interpretation of what the research means. And we can do it by doing several of the following kinds of reflection, like reviewing and synthesizing your whole set of data, critically examining what the data tell you about the question or issues you have explored, and relating your research to the themes in the literature on your topic. Now the last, third, sharing with others. The benefit of presenting your research to other teachers are clear. Teacher accounts allow good teaching and learning ideas to be shared around. Opening up what we do in the classroom inspires us to learn from each other and breaks down classroom isolation. Teachers usually enjoy learning about how other teachers have solved problems they may be experiencing too. They are often surprised or relieved to find out that they are not alone in dealing with various classroom issues. One of the things to consider, of course, is which modes of presentation are most relevant for the different audience you are trying to reach. And these are several modes that we can use to present our research result. The first, the first way is oral modes. In the immediate face-to-face situation, oral reports are a common way of presenting. This kind of report might be used as your research process or a summary that reflecting and planning for the whole research process. Not all of them involve facing a large audience. Occasionally, you might want to use an oral presentation just to develop your ideas further in a small group. And second mode is a visual mode. Visuals are a great way of enhancing your oral presentation. PowerPoint slides accompanying oral presentation are now very common and can certainly help to structure your presentation and remind you of the point you want to make, including photograph, drawing, illustration, handwritten text, diagram, tables, video clip art, sound, symbols, or animation that makes the presentation lively and more appealing to the audience too. And the last mode is written. You might find the idea of reading about your research rather daunting, because teachers are not usually given time to write. And there are no obvious reward in the school system for writing about your teaching. Reading demands time and effort, and it can be hard work to structure your ideas and set them down on a paper. This is especially true if you are not working comfortably in the language you prefer to communicate in. You might also doubt whether anyone will ever read what you have written, or whether a small-scale AR study has anything worth saying that anyone else would be interested in. But, but apart from the downside, it is also a good idea to share the result of our research in a writing way. That is, because we will be accustomed to writing scientifically about our research report. But this is a personal opinion.
Well, thank you for your attention. See you in the next meeting. Hope you understand what we are talking about. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.